Welcome back to Late Night Reading Hour. We are here today with something chaotic. We're here today with something violent and absurd, but altogether very charming. We're here with The Magic Pudding by Norman Lindsay, and this is a children's book from Australia. And as you may have assumed, it's about a magic pudding and these three fine fellows who have come into possession of a never-ending meal, and they must protect their meal from other people who would want to eat it, even though it's never-ending. So, this book came into my life a couple months ago, and I thought, wow, if I had been a kid and I had read this, I would have loved it. It's got the same, well, not quite the same, but it's got an absurd quality to it that reminds me a little bit of like Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. And it's full of songs and poems and lovely little illustrations. We'll read just the first little bit of it, and because I have to always look very deeply into things that don't need to be deeply looked into, we'll talk a little bit about what we read about. So let's go ahead and get started. I believe that this is in the public domain at this point, and we're just reading for educational purposes. So I will periodically hold this up, show you some nice illustrations. But without further ado, let's get into it. This is a frontways view of Bunyip Bluegum and his uncle Wattleberry. At a glance, you can see what a fine, round, splendid fellow Bunyip Bluegum is, without me telling you. At a second glance, you can see that Uncle is more square than round, and that his face has whiskers on it. There they are. Looked at sideways, you can still see what a splendid fellow Bunyip is, though you can only see one of his uncle's whiskers. Observed from behind, however, you completely lose sight of the whiskers, and so fail to realize how immensely important they are. In fact, these very whiskers were the chief cause of Bunyip's leaving home to see the world. For, as he often said to himself, here we have our first little taste of poetry, whiskers alone are bad enough, attached to faces coarse and rough, but how much greater their offense is when stuck on Uncle's countenances. And here we have the sides and back views of them. The plain truth was that Bunyip and his uncle lived in a small house in a tree, and there was no room for the whiskers. What was worse, the whiskers were red, and they blew about in the wind, and Uncle Wattleberry would insist on bringing them into the dinner table with him, where they got in the soup. Bunyip Bluegum was a tidy bear. He objected to whisker soup, so he was forced to eat his meals outside, which was awkward, and besides, lizards came and borrowed his soup. Got some foreshadowing, and there's them in their little house. His uncle refused to listen to reason on the subject of whiskers. It was quite useless giving him hints such as presents of razors and scissors and boxes of matches to burn them off. On such occasions he would remark, "Shaving may add an air that's somewhat brisker. For dignity, commend me to the whisker." Or when more deeply moved, he would exclaim, "As noble thoughts the inward being grace, so noble whiskers dignify the face." Prayers and entreaties to remove the whiskers being of no avail, Bunyip decided to leave home without more ado. The trouble was that he couldn't make up his mind whether to be a traveler or a swagman. You can't go about the world being nothing. But if you are a traveler, you have to carry a bag. While if you are a swagman, you have to carry a swag. And the question is, which is the heavier? At length he decided to put the matter before Egbert Rumpus Bumpus the poet, and ask his advice. He found Egbert busy writing poems on a slate. He was so busy that he only had time to sing out, "Don't interrupt the poet, friend, until the poem's at an end," and went on writing harder than ever. He wrote all down one side of the slate and all up the other, and then remarked, "There's no time to finish that. The time has come to have our chat. Be quick, my friend, your business state before I take another slate." Here's Rumpus Bumpus. "The fact is," said Bunyip, "I've decided to see the world, and I cannot make up my mind whether to be a traveler or a swagman. Which would you advise?" Then said the poet, "As you've no bags, it's plain to see a traveler you cannot be. And as a swag you haven't either. You cannot be a swagman neither. For travelers must carry bags, and swagmen have to hump their swags, like bottleos or ragmen. As you have neither swag nor bag, you must remain a simple wag, and not a swag or bag man." "Dear me," said Bunyip Bluegum, "I never thought of that. What must I do in order to see the world without carrying swags or bags?" The poet thought deeply, put on his eyeglasses, and said impressively, "Take my advice, don't carry bags, for bags are just as bad as swags. They never made to measure. To see the world your simple trick is but to take a walking stick. Assume an air of pleasure, and tell the people near and far you stroll about because you are a gentleman of leisure." Here we are. "You have solved the problem," said Bunyip Bluegum, and wringing his friend's hand, he ran straight home, took his uncle's walking stick, and assuming an air of pleasure, set off to see the world. He found a great many things to see, such as dandelions and ants and traction engines and bolting horses and furniture being removed, besides being kept busy raising his hat and passing the time of day with people on the road, for he was very well bred, polite in his manners, graceful in his attitudes, and able to converse on a great variety of subjects, having read all the best Australian poets. Here's him with his little walking stick, talking to people. Unfortunately, in the hurry of leaving home, he had forgotten to provide himself with food. And at lunchtime he found himself attacked by the pains of hunger. "Dear me," he said, "I feel quite faint. I had no idea that one's stomach was so important. I have everything I require except food. But without food, everything is rather less than nothing. I've got a stick to walk with. I've got a mind to think with. I've got a voice to talk with. I've got an eye to wink with. I've lots of teeth to eat with. A brand new hat to bow with. A pair of fists to beat with. A rage to have a row with. No joy it brings to have indeed a lot of things one does not need. Observe my doleful plight, for here am I without a crumb to satisfy a raging tum. Oh, what an oversight!" As he was indulging in these melancholy reflections, he came round a bend in the road and discovered two people in the very act of having lunch. These people were none other than Bill Barnacle the sailor and his friend Sam Sonoff, the penguin bold. Here is our friend. He is hungry. Bill was a small man with a large hat, a beard half as large as the hat, and feet half as large as his beard. Sam Sonoff's feet were sitting down and his body was standing up, because his feet were so short and his body so long that he had to do both together. They had a pudding in a basin, and the smell that arose from it was so delightful that Bunyip Bluegum was quite unable to pass on. "Pardon me," he said, raising his hat, "but am I right in supposing that this is a steak and kidney pudding?" "At present it is," said Bill Barnacle. "It smells delightful," said Bunyip Bluegum. "It is delightful," said Bill, eating a large mouthful. Bunyip Bluegum was too much of a gentleman to invite himself to lunch, but he said carelessly, "Am I right in supposing that there are onions in this pudding?" Before Bill could reply, a thick, angry voice came out of the pudding, saying, "Onions, bunions, corns and crabs, whiskers, wheels, and hansom cabs, beef and bottles, beer and bones, give him a feed and end his groans." "Albert, Albert," said Bill to the pudding, "where's your manners?" "Where's yours?" said the pudding rudely, guzzling away there and never so much as offering this stranger a slice. "There you are," said Bill. "There's nothing this pudding enjoys more than offering slices of himself to strangers." "How very polite of him," said Bunyip, but the pudding replied loudly, "Politeness be sugared, politeness be hanged, politeness be jumbled and tumbled and banged. It's simply a matter of putting on pace. Politeness has nothing to do with the case." "Always anxious to be eaten," said Bill. "That's this pudding's mania. Well, to oblige him, I ask you to join us at lunch." "Delighted, I'm sure," said Bunyip, seating himself. "There's nothing I enjoy more than a good go in a steak and kidney pudding in the open air." "Well said," remarked Sam Sonoff, patting him on the back. "Hearty eaters are always welcome." "You'll enjoy this pudding," said Bill, handing him a large slice. "This is very rare pudding." "It's a cut and come again pudding," said Sam. "It's a Christmas steak and apple dumpling pudding," said Bill. "It's a— shall I tell him?" he asked, looking at Bill. Bill nodded, and the penguin leaned across to Bunyip Bluegum and said in a low voice, "It's a magic pudding." Here they are. "No whispering!" shouted the pudding angrily. "Speak up! Don't strain a pudding's ears at the meal table." "No harm intended, Albert," said Sam. "I was merely remarking how well the crops are looking." "Call him Albert when addressing him," he added to Bunyip Bluegum. "It soothes him." "I'm delighted to make your acquaintance, Albert," said Bunyip. "No soft soap from total strangers," said the pudding rudely. "Don't take any notice of him, mate," said Bill. "That's only his rough and ready way. What the pudding requires is politeness and constant eating." They had a delightful meal, eating as much as possible, for whenever they stopped eating, the pudding sang out, "Eat away, chew away, munch and bolt and guzzle. Never leave the table till you're full up to the muzzle." But at length they had to stop, in spite of these encouraging remarks, and as they refused to eat any more, the pudding got out of his basin, remarking, "If you won't eat any more, here's giving you a run for the sake of exercise." And he set off so swiftly on a pair of extremely thin legs that Bill had to run like an antelope to catch him. "My word," said Bill, when the pudding was brought back, "you have to be as smart as paint to keep this pudding in order. He's that artful, lawyers couldn't manage him. Put your hat on, Albert, like a little gentleman," he added, placing the basin on his head. He took the pudding's hand, Sam took the other, and they all set off along the road. A peculiar thing about the pudding was that, though they had all had a great many slices of him, there was no sign of the place whence the slices had been cut. That's where the magic comes in, exclaimed Bill. The more you eats, the more you gets. Me and Sam has been eating away at this puddin' for years, and there's not a mark on him. Perhaps, he added, you would like to hear how we came to own this remarkable puddin'. Nothing would please me more, said Bunyip Bluegum. In that case, said Bill, let her go for a song. And there they are, walking down the road with their puddin'. And here's a song about some murder. Ho, the cook of the saucy sausage was a feller called Curry and Rice, a son of a gun, as fat as a ton, with a face as roundin' as a hot cross bun, or a barrel to be precise. One winter's morn we rounds the Horn, a rollin' homeward bound. We strikes on the ice, goes down in a trice, and all on board but Curry and Rice and me and Sam are drowned. For Sam and me and the cook, yer see, we climbs on a lump of ice, and there in the sleet we suffered a treat for several months from frozen feet, with nothin' at all but ice to eat, and ice does not suffice. And Sam and me couldn't agree with the cook at any price. We was both as thin as a piece of tin, when that there cook was bustin' his skin. Oh, nothin' to eat but ice. Sam says to me it's a mystery, more deep than words can utter. Whatever we do, here's me and you, us both as thin as Irish stew, while he's as fat as butter. But late one night we wakes in fright to see by a pale blue flare the cook has got in a phantom pot a big plum duff and a rump steak hot, and the guzzlin' wizard is eatin' the lot on top of an iceberg bear. There's a verse left out here, said Bill, stopping the song, owing to the difficulty of explaining exactly what happened when me and Sam discovered the deceitful nature of that cook. The next verse is as follows. Now Sam and me can never agree what happened to Curry and Rice. The whole affair is shrouded in doubt, for the night was dark and the flare went out, and all we heard was a startled shout, though I think meself in the subsequent rout that us being thin and him being stout, in the middle of pushin' and shovin' about, he must have fell off the ice. That won't do, you know, began the puddin', but Sam said hurriedly, it was very dark, and there's no sayin' at this date what happened. Yes, there is, said the puddin', for I had my eye on the whole affair, and it's my belief that if he hadn't been so round, you'd never rolled him off the iceberg, for you was both singing out, yo, heave ho, for half an hour, and him trying to hold on Bill's beard. In the haste of the moment, said Bill, he may have got a bit of a shove, for the ice being slippy, and us being justly enraged, and him being round as a barrel, he may, as I said, have been too fat to save himself from rolling off the iceberg. The point, however, is immaterial to our story, which concerns this puddin'. And this puddin', said Bill, patting him on the basin, was the very puddin' that Curry and Rice invented on the iceberg. He must have been a very clever cook, said Bunyip. He was a poor feller, he was, said Bill, greatly affected. For plum duff or Irish stew, there wasn't his equal in the land. But enough of these sad subjects. Pausing only to explain that me and Sam got off the iceberg on a homeward-bound chicken coop, landed on Tierra del Fuego, walked to Valparaiso, and so got home. I will proceed to enliven the occasion with the Ballad of the Boatswain's Bride, and that's where we'll stop. I forgot to show you a couple of pictures. We have our castaways. A couple more. And it goes on like this. We break out into song and poems every once in a while. The main conflict of this story is going to be that the pudding wants to run away, but also that people want to be stealing the pudding. And as I was reading this, it makes me think, like, is this a political commentary? Is this about the means of production, or um I don't know. And then as I was reading, I thought, well, it's probably about sharing. It's a kid's book. There's probably a moral end to it. But there isn't. And at the end, I'll just go ahead and spoil this for you. At the end, they build a big tree house away from the robbers and just keep eating the never-ending pudding. And what struck me, long after I finished it the first time was, oh, I think it's just a fun book. It's an entertaining children's book. And I don't see that a lot in children's literature anymore. I am currently working in a bookstore. I like to go hide behind the stacks and read the children's books because you can get away with reading a book in 5 minutes. But there's always something, there's always a lesson. And this book maybe has come from a time where entertainment was more involved in literature. There wouldn't have been television necessarily, or movies. It wouldn't have been the same as it is today. I think we often have to justify writing books by saying that they are smart or that you're going to learn something. We want to learn something from books. Books are for smart people, right? And I appreciate this book for not having necessarily a moral ending to the story, because it reminds me that books are just so, having the trouble finding the right word, but like very vast in an application. And it's enjoyable to read something that's just fun. So I hope you enjoyed this reading today. I'm gonna come back with a couple more books that I'd like to share, and maybe we'll get into reading something longer. Well, I think we'll get into reading something longer at some point. I'm still taking a little bit of time to recover from the house fire. Just when you think just when you think you're over something, it's gonna get you again. So I've been taking a little bit of a break from pretty much everything. But this has been really fun to do, and I hope you have a wonderful day and all of your dreams come true. I'll see you next time.